Hi everyone, this week we're back in Christmas mode. We're going to be making a gorgeous little reverse applique table runner or mat. I've provided free templates on the blog for this, which I'll link to in the description. You'll need 4 squares measuring 10.5 by 10.5 inches. For this one I'm going to be using the textured blender. A plain fabric would work just as well. You'll also need fabric for the inner pieces of the applique. For the pattern supplied, this will need to be around 7 by 8 inches. If in doubt, cut out the pattern and place it on the inner fabric. Then cut about 1/2 inch out from the edges. You'll also need a long strip of backing fabric measuring 11 inches by the width of the fabric, which is normally 44 inches. I then cut 3 strips measuring 1 inch by 10.5 inches for the sashing. I later decided to use tartan, but wait to see what it looks like and you can decide then. To bind the runner, you'll need 6 strips of tartan, or whatever you choose to use, measuring 2 inches by the width of fabric, which in my case were fat quarters. I do explain this a little more as we need it, as we get to it. So with your pattern pieces cut out, draw around them using a heat erasable pen or other marking tool that you're confident will be easy to remove. Your pattern should be as centered as possible and be facing right side up on the right side of the fabric. With a sharp pair of scissors, cut out the inner section of fabric. Add glue on the back of that fabric around the perimeter of the cut that you just made. Now place the applique fabric on the back face down and press it a little so that it sticks. Turn that over and iron it from the top. Now I've got all 4 glued in place. I need to stitch them. I'm going to use stitch 44 for this one. And it does look cute, but I also want to show you a straight stitch will look fine as well, so that's what I'll do with this one. There we go. You can make up your own mind which you prefer or use a completely different stitch. So I'm going to go off and repeat that on the remaining two, and when I come back I'll show you how we join all the blocks together. So your 1 inch by 10.5 inch strips of fabric. After consideration and asking my husband, I decided to use tartan to join them. These are going to bring the top of the table runner together. Just to point out, you can add more blocks if you have a longer table or you just want the runner to be longer. However, this does need to be backed towards the end, and 4 blocks means that it's just about right for a normal width of fabric, a 44 inch fabric. There's nothing stopping you joining 2 pieces of fabric for the back, so you add as many as you like. Anyway, place one of the strips right side down on the right edge of your first block. Sew down the edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Fold that open and place the second block right side down on top of the open sashing. Sew this again. Now open the 2 up and you can see a little of the sashing through the centre, and those 2 are actually now joined together. So we're going to repeat that process to add the other blocks. Now measure the length. It should be around 44 inches. It's probably closer to 42 to be fair. You'll need a piece of fabric measuring 44 by 11, and you'll need the same in batting if you're adding it. So let's prepare the binding before moving on to create the sandwich of fabrics. Take one of your strips and place it facing you. The next strip should be added on top of that with the right side facing down. Add it on the right hand side of the first strip, as you can see me doing here. So we're going to sew from the inner top edge to the outer bottom edge. Open up the fabric to ensure it's laying flat. If it's not flat, it's because you sewed the wrong corner to corner. You'll need to unpick and re-sew in the opposite direction. Once you know it's laying flat, you can cut the excess fabric down to 1/4 inch. And we're going to keep repeating that until all the pieces are sewn together. Now fold the strip across its length, fold in half and join the bottom raw edges. Then run over this with an iron to form a fold in one side. Do this down the entire length of the fabric. Iron the backing fabric if it needs it. Place it right side down on the ironing board. Then add the wadding. And complete the sandwich by adding your runner top. I do like to do this on the ironing board because it hangs over the edge, and so gravity does some of the work for you. This is especially advantageous if you're doing a large quilt. So carefully pin the layers together. Now this next part is up to you. I'm just going to use straight lines within the runner top to stitch through all the layers I'm going to stitch in the ditch. But feel free to experiment, maybe even do a little free motion quilting. Now we can trim the excess wadding and backing away to straighten up all four sides. Now there's just the binding. As I've used a plain fabric blender as my primary colour, I decided to use bits from the pattern fabric, the tartan, to form a roll of binding, which obviously we made earlier. So just to explain a little more, the binding needs to be 108 inches long, I know that sounds huge, but it's about 5 to 6 strips from a standard fat quarter. The strips need to be 2 inches wide, so you're going to need a strip that is 2 inches by 108 inches at least. I always make a little more than required just in case of any issues, so I cut 6 strips. If you're using standard fabric, it's likely 44 inches, so 2.5. In that case I cut 3. So now we can add the binding to the runner. We need a tail left unsewn on either end so that we can join the binding together. And we do have a super easy way to do this, but we'll get there. We'll be working on the back of the project. So place the raw edge of the binding against the raw edge on the back of the runner, halfway down one of the longer sides. Remember, we need 10 inches unsewn at the beginning. Pin or clip the binding in place all the way down to your first corner. To be honest, I don't normally clip it or pin it. I find it's actually easier to add the binding if it's held in place as you sew it. There's more movement. So begin sewing using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning a few times to reinforce the stitch, and remove any clips or pins as you sew. You're going to sew all the way down to the first corner until you're around 1/4 inch away from the edge. If you're struggling to visualise that 1/4 inch, measure it and mark the 1/4 inch directly on the binding to help you. When you get to that point, stop sewing with your needle still down in the fabric. Lift the presser foot and pivot your fabric so that the stitches will be sewn off the fabric edge at a 45-degree angle. Remove the entire thing from under the presser foot. And now take your binding and fold it up and away from you. And then fold it back down on top of itself. Begin sewing from 1/4 inch down. You'll be able to feel the additional fabric underneath the corner, but if you feel happier marking, then go ahead and do that. You can do that obviously before you put the fabric back onto the sewing machine. Sew from 1/4 inch all the way down to the next corner and repeat the process. Once you've passed all the corners, you'll eventually get to the side that you started with. Sew down that side until you're roughly, again, 10 inches away from the first stitch. If you have to rewatch this part a few times until you fully understand what's happening so that you don't mess up your cut. This method is, in my opinion, the easiest. and as long as you cut from the correct side, it'll fit perfectly every time. So firstly, make a little mark roughly halfway between the two binding tails on your actual runner. The mark won't be seen on the finished project, so it's fine. Now snip a little piece of the binding from whichever is the longest edge, your starting tail or your ending tail. Just cut a tiny bit off the end. We're going to use that to determine the correct cut. So flatten out the starting tail and lay that off cut of binding with the folded edge against the mark that you made on the runner. Draw across the edge of that offcut on the side where the tail isn't sewn. Trim any excess past that line, and then we're going to repeat this for the other tail end using the same centre mark. So mark the binding, so place the offcut, mark that cut line, again using the tail end to make sure that you're cutting the correct side, and then cut. So those tails will now sit 2 inches over one another, because that's how wide that the binding fabric is. So because the tail ends have been cut to the correct size, there's no more measuring. Fold the runner up a little bit, it'll help you to manoeuvre the tail ends together. Place the ends right sides together. Your outer crease lines in the binding will be face to face. It can be a little bit fiddly to hold them together, so pop a pin or two in once you've got them lined up. We're going to sew corner to corner from the top left down to the bottom right. Pull your runner flat to check that the binding sits correctly. Once you've checked and you're happy, cut the excess off the back of the binding down to 1/4 inch. Now sew from where you previously finished all the way back down to where you started. Sorry, having issues with the bracket holding the camera. Now the binding is joined up and completely stitched to the back of the runner, we need to secure it on the front. This time you need to start in a corner. I promise this does get easier every time you do it. Be sure to use a bobbin thread that will blend in on the back of your runner as well. As we sew this down on the front, there'll be an additional line of stitches on the back. They shouldn't touch the binding, so just swap out the bobbin thread for the same colour you used to actually quilt the rest of the runner. Fold over one edge of the binding, and then fold the following edge over to cover the first. If folded correctly, it'll create a perfect mitered corner. Hold this in place and put under the presser foot. Sew slowly until you're confident the corner is stitched. You'll also want to back stitch a little bit there too. Continue folding the binding over to the front of the runner and stitching as close to the edge as you can. When you get to the corner, fold down one side, then fold over the other side on the top as we did before. Again, you need to hold this in place so that it doesn't shift. I don't recommend pinning or clipping, because by the time the machine has stitched through enough to hold the corner, you'll have gone over the pin, which obviously is never good. So continue stitching, repeating the steps for the corners until the entire runner is bound. Give it a good run over with the iron, and there we go. I think it would have been better without the wadding, but I wanted to show it with it, as it's easier to omit it than it is to explain after the fact how to add it in. If you're not putting hot things on the mat or runner, you don't need it. So I hope you enjoyed watching and that you go on to make this for your Christmas table. Until next time, happy sewing. If folded correctly, it'll create Hold this in place and put under the presser foot. Presser. Hold this in place and put under your presser